My name is Harper Lane, and this story is as real as the cedar scent that still lingers in the walls of my parents' house on Willow Street in Seattle. The house stands on a quiet hill overlooking Elliott Bay, a classic craftsman with white trim, a wraparound porch, and a swing that creaks whenever the wind comes off the water. My parents bought it 12 years ago for $780,000, a bold move back then, but it was their dream. Every plank, every photograph on the wall, felt like a chapter of our lives. After their accident in March, the silence inside that house became unbearable. My mother's piano sat untouched, the breakfast nook empty except for the faint imprint of the cushions where she used to sit every Sunday morning with her crossword puzzle. The scent of lemon polish still clung to the air, like she had just been there. I was drowning in memories, trying to keep the house in order while the world tilted without them. My brother, Thomas Lane, was the opposite of me. He was the golden one, the successful attorney in Boston with a wife who wore designer heels to family dinners. At the funeral, he stood tall in his charcoal suit, giving a speech that made everyone cry, except me. I knew that behind the tears and trembling voice was a man already calculating. Thomas always believed our parents' success was his inheritance by birthright, not by love or effort. 2 weeks after the funeral, I came home from the grocery store to find the locks changed. The brass knob on the front door, the one my father polished every summer, would not turn. At first, I thought it was a mistake, maybe a jam. But through the window, I saw movement. Boxes stacked where my mother's china cabinet had been. And then Thomas appeared, opening the door with that smug attorney smile that always preceded trouble. "Harper," he said, adjusting his tie like we were in court. "This property is part of the Lane family trust. As the surviving son, I'm the lawful trustee. You can stay a few days, but you'll need to relocate. I'll send you an allowance, say $2,000, to help you transition." His tone was calm, rehearsed, dripping with control. Behind him, his wife Vanessa leaned against the wall in her silk blouse, her manicured fingers wrapped around a mug from my parents' kitchen. The sight made something in me twist. I set my grocery bag on the counter, forcing my voice to stay steady. "Repeat that," I said. He raised a brow. "Repeat what?" "Everything you just said." He looked amused, but he did it. Every word, every claim. I tapped the screen of my phone, the red light glowing from the recorder app. His arrogance blinded him so completely that he didn't even notice. When he finished, I smiled and said, "Got it." Later that night, I drove through the rain to the small branch of Northwest Bank on Queen and Avenue. My father had once handed me a small brass key on my 25th birthday. He said, "It's for emergencies you can't predict, Harper." I never understood what he meant until that night. The key fit a safe deposit box labeled under both my parents' names. Inside, there was a single thick envelope addressed to me in my mother's elegant handwriting. My heart pounded as I unfolded the letter. "If you're reading this, sweetheart, then your father and I are gone, and Thomas has done exactly what we feared. Do not argue with him. Do not beg. You have the truth, and that's enough. Contact Margaret Cole immediately. She has everything." There were several documents beneath the letter, sealed with notary stamps and signatures I recognized. Property deeds, trust amendments, and a will, all naming me as the sole beneficiary. My parents hadn't just trusted me, they had protected me. I sat in my car for nearly an hour before calling the number written on the note. Margaret Cole answered on the second ring, her voice calm and measured. "Harper, I've been expecting your call," she said, as though my parents were still alive and guiding every step. She explained that they had revised their estate plan 3 months before the accident, aware of what Thomas might try. Every asset, real estate, accounts, and investments was placed under a trust with me as both trustee and beneficiary. She had copies of everything and letters to the court already prepared. "Don't confront him," she warned. "Just document everything. Let me handle the law." When I returned home, the house felt like a stranger. The walls that once held laughter now echoed with the sound of Thomas's footsteps and the scrape of boxes. I slept in my old bedroom that night, phone recording on the nightstand, catching every argument, every insult. The next morning, I found Thomas in my father's study, labeling boxes with a black marker. He didn't even look up. "You should start packing. I'll wire you the allowance this week," he said, like a landlord dismissing a tenant. I made coffee and said nothing, but my recorder sat quietly in my pocket, glowing red. Every word he spoke was a line of evidence. By Friday, I had hours of recordings, photos of boxes, and a full list of family heirlooms that had mysteriously vanished. Margaret filed for a temporary restraining order and a writ of possession on my behalf, using the secret will as the foundation. She worked fast, submitting the documents to King County Superior Court before Thomas even realized what was happening. That Monday morning, the clerk stamped the case number and the order went into effect. For the first time since my parents' funeral, I felt something solid beneath my feet, like the earth itself had shifted in my favor. I stood in front of the house, the morning light glinting off the windows, and whispered, "I'm home." But I knew this was just the beginning. Thomas had declared war, and I was ready to fight, not with anger, but with truth, law, and the quiet strength my parents had always seen in me. Margaret's office sat high above 4th Avenue, overlooking the ferries that glided across Elliott Bay like slow-moving ghosts. The view was calm, but the air inside the office buzzed with quiet intensity. Margaret Cole, my parents' attorney, was a woman who balanced grace with precision. She wore black suits, simple pearl earrings, and sneakers that squeaked faintly on the polished floor as she moved from cabinet to cabinet, pulling files like a surgeon gathering instruments. She laid out the documents on the conference table in neat rows: certified copies of my parents' secret will, the trust transfer documents that placed every asset in my name, and durable powers of attorney that had expired the moment they died. She even had a memo from a forensic accountant named Jared Quinn. When I saw the thickness of that file, I realized my parents hadn't just planned, they'd prepared for war. Jared was a quiet man in his late 40s with a sharp, mathematical kind of calm. He spread the pages before me like a map of deceit. "We traced several transactions that took place during the week after your parents' funeral," he said. "Your brother moved faster than grief." He pointed to one page, a bank statement showing a wire transfer of $85,000 from my parents' joint account to a Boston LLC registered under Vanessa's name. Another sheet showed a cashier's check for $12,400 made out to a so-called household manager, though no such person existed. Jared's fingers tapped the paper like a metronome. He was trying to drain liquidity before you could respond. Then came the locksmith receipt, the one dated 2 days after the funeral. "He billed this to the estate," Jared added. "That was the day your keys stopped working." I stared at the receipts, my chest tightening with anger and disbelief. Every act Thomas committed was rehearsed greed disguised as authority. He thought being a lawyer meant being untouchable. "Fraud loves laziness," Jared said with a faint smile. "And your brother was very lazy about covering his tracks." With Margaret's guidance, we filed a quiet title action to secure ownership of the Willow Street house and a lease pendens, a legal notice that effectively froze any potential sale or transfer of property. Within 48 hours, Judge Elena Morales signed a temporary restraining order that barred Thomas from touching a single asset of the Lane estate. Margaret arranged for a process server to deliver the documents directly to him at the front door of the house. I watched from my car parked across the street as he stepped outside in his tailored gray suit, holding a mug of coffee. When the server handed him the thick packet, he took it with 2 fingers like it were contaminated. He laughed as he opened the first page, but the laughter faded as his eyes moved down the paragraphs. His jaw clenched, and the color drained from his face. Vanessa appeared a moment later in her silk robe, her hair perfectly styled. She glanced at the papers, then at me across the street. "You gold digger," she shouted, her voice slicing through the air. "You're stealing what's rightfully his." I didn't respond. Instead, I lifted my phone, took a photo of the new scratch on my mother's antique hutch visible through the window, and noted the time in my journal. Documentation was armor now. Across the street, my neighbor, Mrs. McKenna, gave me a subtle thumbs up. She had seen everything. Her loyalty was the kind that doesn't ask for thanks. That night, Margaret and I met in her office to review the recordings from my phone. I had captured hours of conversations. On one, Thomas bragged that probate judges always defer to the sibling who sounds professional. On another, he told Vanessa he would keep the lake house in Bellevue and let Harper have the little craftsman. His tone was mocking, like he was handing out prizes at a family fair. In a third recording, he explained how he'd sell my mother's jewelry quietly for cash, saying, "She doesn't even wear half of it." I felt my stomach twist with disgust as I listened, but Margaret's eyes gleamed with purpose. "This is gold," she said softly. "Not emotional gold, legal gold." He's confessing in plain language. By the next morning, I had written out every timestamp, every quote, and every context. Margaret compiled them into an affidavit, a cross between a diary and a ledger, each page a record of betrayal. Meanwhile, Jared verified every transaction with bank certifications, building an airtight case. My parents had set aside $150,000 for estate administration in a separate account, which we now used for legal fees, security updates, and professional moving services. I hired a bonded team to remove all personal items from the house and store them safely until the court decided ownership. Changing the alarm codes on the house was one of the most satisfying things I'd ever done. It was as though I'd turned the key on my own fear. Each night that week, I went through every cabinet and drawer, cleaning, cataloging, and taking photos. I paid the utilities from the estate account and even renewed the home insurance policy, small but powerful acts that reminded me of control. By Friday, we had everything we needed: the secret will, the trust, Jared's report, my affidavit, and a final letter my father had written to Judge Morales 3 months before his death. It was written in his careful, deliberate script and began simply, "Your Honor, if you are reading this, then my fears about my son's conduct have come to pass. He is a talented attorney, but he has a blind spot for power. My daughter, Harper, has always had the steadier hand and the truer heart. Please protect her as you would protect the truth itself." The final line made my throat ache. Fairness is not flattery. The hearing was scheduled for Tuesday at 9 a.m. Judge Elena Morales was known for her discipline. No theatrics, no manipulation. She was the kind of woman who saw through charm like glass. Margaret advised me to dress like the mountain, not the weather. I took her words to heart. On Monday night, I pressed my mother's navy blazer and laid it on the chair beside my bed. The wind moved softly through the maples outside, the porch swing creaking like a familiar metronome. Before I turned off the light, I picked up my phone and opened the voice recorder. I didn't need to record anymore, but the sound of that little red dot glowing on the screen gave me peace. "I'm ready," I whispered into the quiet. "I'll protect what you built." For the first time since March, the house didn't feel empty. It felt alive again, as though my parents were listening. And deep inside, I knew the next morning would change everything. The courthouse on 3rd Avenue smelled faintly of coffee and paper, like anxiety wrapped in caffeine. My stomach churned as I followed Margaret through the metal detectors. She carried our case file pressed tightly to her chest, calm as ever. I, on the other hand, felt like my heartbeat was echoing off the marble floors. This was the day everything would unfold. We entered Department 12 just before 9 a.m. The courtroom was wide, with tall windows that let in cold Seattle light. The air conditioner hummed above us. At the front, Judge Elena Morales sat behind the bench, reading through the stack of documents Margaret had filed. Her expression gave nothing away. The bailiff, a tall woman named Rivera, called the calendar. When our case was announced, Margaret stood, adjusted her jacket, and gave my hand a quick squeeze. Thomas entered 5 minutes late. He looked every bit the polished attorney, hair combed back, navy suit perfectly tailored, tie knotted tight. Vanessa followed close behind, wearing black heels far too high for marble floors. She clutched her designer purse like a shield. Thomas didn't glance at me. He didn't have to. The arrogance radiating from him said everything. As he crossed the threshold, Judge Morales looked up. Her gaze was steady, sharp, and unsettlingly calm. She had already read everything: our exhibits, the secret will, the trust, the forensic reports, and the audio recordings. Every receipt, Every transaction, every line of dialogue we had captured was laid out before her like evidence in a movie. "Counselor Lane," she said in a measured tone, "please step forward." Thomas blinked, surprised to be addressed before introductions even began. He approached the bench, his smile polite but uneasy. Judge Morales lifted a single sheet of paper. "Before we proceed with the argument," she said, "this court must address a matter already decided under seal. Based on the pleadings and exhibits submitted by petitioner's counsel, the court has found sufficient grounds for a bench warrant." Thomas frowned. "A bench warrant?" The judge continued, her tone unflinching. "For contempt of court and attempted conversion of estate assets. Bail is set at $250,000. You will be remanded to King County custody pending the evidentiary hearing." A murmur rippled through the courtroom. The reporters in the back straightened. Vanessa gasped. Thomas's jaw slackened. "Your Honor, with respect, Judge Morales raised her hand. "You will have counsel. You will have time. But today you will have consequences." The bailiff stepped forward. "There's a particular sound that exists between disbelief and surrender, a soft, hollow breath that comes when pride collapses." That was the sound Thomas made as Rivera placed a firm hand on his elbow. Vanessa stood up, her voice breaking the silence. "You can't do this. He's an attorney." The judge didn't even look at her. "Sit down, Mrs. Lane. You are not a party to this proceeding." Margaret remained still, professional as stone. I sat frozen, trying to comprehend what was happening. It felt surreal, watching the brother who had once protected me from bullies now stand before a judge in handcuffs. But I couldn't afford sympathy. He'd made choices, and the law had simply caught up. Judge Morales turned her attention to our side of the table. "As for Ms. Harper Lane," she said, "this court recognizes the December will and trust as valid. The property located at 427 Willow Street and all related assets are hereby confirmed under her sole ownership and management. The temporary writ of possession is made permanent. The restraining order against Thomas Lane remains in effect." Her pen moved quickly across the page. The gavel tapped once, light, final, and resonant. It was over. For a long moment I didn't move. The words floated around me like snow, soft but heavy. Margaret leaned closer and whispered, "That's the sound of justice, Harper." I nodded, unable to speak. When they led Thomas away, he didn't look back. His pride wouldn't let him. Vanessa sat back down, pale and shaking, texting furiously. She looked like a queen dethroned, dressed for power but stripped of it entirely. Margaret gathered the files neatly and turned to me. "You handled this with dignity," she said. "Not many people would have." I didn't feel dignified, I murmured. I just felt tired. Outside the courtroom, the hallway buzzed. Reporters hovered, waiting for another case, but the sight of a lawyer being taken into custody always caught attention. Margaret guided me to the elevator without a word. When the doors closed, she finally smiled, a small, rare thing. "You did the brave part," she said softly. "I just did the paperwork." Down on the street, the world carried on as though nothing had changed. People hurried past, coffee cups in hand, conversations about work and weather floating through the air. The contrast felt surreal. I bought a cup of coffee from a street vendor and took a sip. It was too hot, too bitter, but it tasted like victory. Margaret handed me a signed copy of the court order, the official seal still drying. "Keep this safe," she said. "It's more than paper, it's freedom." When I got back to Willow Street, I stood for a long time on the porch before unlocking the door. The same key that once refused me now turned easily. Inside, the house was quiet but no longer cold. I walked from room to room, tracing my fingers over the memories that still lived in the furniture, the oak table where my father paid bills, the piano my mother polished every Friday, the pencil marks on the doorway that measured our childhood growth. For the first time since their passing, I felt them there, not as ghosts, but as guardians who had set this plan in motion long before I understood its meaning. I sat in the breakfast nook and looked out the window. The maple trees swayed gently, their leaves rustling like whispered approval. Then, slowly, I took out my notebook and wrote one sentence at the top of a fresh page. "You are not the weather." That phrase had echoed in my mind since the courthouse, when everything seemed to spin out of my control. It reminded me that I didn't have to react to every storm. I could be steady, like the mountain Margaret told me to be. I closed the notebook and exhaled, long and deep. The battle was over, but the rebuilding was just beginning. Outside, the sun cut through the clouds, and for the first time in months, the house on Willow Street didn't feel like a battlefield. It felt like home. The weeks that followed felt like stepping into sunlight after months of rain, soft, bright, and unfamiliar. I woke each morning in the house on Willow Street, still half expecting to hear my father's footsteps in the hall or my mother humming in the kitchen. Instead, there was silence, broken only by the sound of my own healing. My first task was to order. Jared, ever meticulous, arrived one morning with a clipboard and laptop, ready to catalog every remaining asset. Together, we opened drawers, lifted boxes, and recorded serial numbers and appraisals. We moved slowly, item by item, reclaiming what my brother had tried to erase. The lake house near Bellevue needed a new roof, $28,000, according to the estimate. I approved it. The rental condo in Ballard was occupied by a kind couple who had endured months of uncertainty. I renewed their lease, lowering their rent by $50 as a gesture of peace. Margaret helped me transfer the estate's bank accounts into my name. It felt odd signing my own name on documents that once carried both my parents. The total balance, just over $2.3 million, wasn't what mattered most. What mattered was that every cent was accounted for, properly and legally. For the first time, I felt in control of both my grief and my future. I also began to see the ledger differently. Money was no longer a symbol of conflict. It was a language my parents had used to express their faith in me. So, I decided to continue that legacy. I set aside $100,000 to create the Lane Scholarship for first-generation students at a Seattle community college. The first $25,000 check I wrote was small compared to the wounds it was meant to heal, but when I placed the receipt under a magnet on my refrigerator, it felt like I'd just placed a piece of my parents' spirit back into the world. Then came the letter. It arrived one Thursday morning, postmarked from the county jail. The envelope was thin, the handwriting neat, Thomas's. My stomach tightened as I opened it. Inside was a brief message and a proposal, written in the careful tone of a man still pretending to negotiate. Dear Harper, I know I've made mistakes. I acted out of grief, confusion, and fear. I wish to resolve things peacefully. If you agree to a joint administration of the estate, I will arrange for you to receive $50,000 immediately. Let's put this behind us and move forward as a family. Family. The word nearly made me laugh. He had used it like a tool, never a truth. I forwarded the letter to Margaret, who responded the next morning with a draft reply, short, direct, and final. The estate is not subject to negotiation. My client declines your offer and will proceed as directed by the court. If you wish to begin again, do so under oath. When Margaret sent it, I felt both relief and sorrow. Thomas's choices had carved an unbridgeable distance between us. Yet, even knowing that, a part of me still mourned the brother I used to have, the one who helped me ride my bike down Queen and Hill, who stayed up late watching movies when I was too scared to sleep. But that boy no longer existed. A week later, the district attorney filed 2 charges against Thomas, attempted theft in the first degree and contempt of court. Jared discovered that Thomas and Vanessa had hired a locksmith at midnight, days before his arrest, to open the garage and remove a hidden safe. The receipt showed Vanessa's signature. She later claimed ignorance, but the truth was in the paper trail. Vanessa hired her own attorney and disappeared to Boston. The tabloids called it the Lane family estate scandal, a headline that made me wince every time I saw it online. But the truth was simple. I had not destroyed my family. I had simply protected what was already mine. By June, the dust began to settle. The case moved into sentencing, and my role was mostly to sign and confirm. The silence of closure is strange. It feels peaceful, but it also echoes. To fill that space, I hosted a small gathering at the house. My friend Lily brought lemon bars, my neighbor Mrs. McKenna arrived with her endless optimism, and Jared showed up carrying a folder of finalized estate reports. We sat on the back deck under a sky streaked with summer gold. The garden my mother once tended bloomed again, tiny patches of lavender pushing through the soil she had loved. We talked about everything except the court case. For once, laughter didn't feel borrowed. It was ours again. As the sun lowered behind the cedar fence, a courier arrived at the gate with a padded envelope. It bore Margaret's return address and a small note attached from a sealed file your father left for you, to be delivered when the house is safe. Inside was a single metal key labeled Ballard Bridge Storage, Unit 47A. My pulse quickened. I excused myself, grabbed my keys, and drove across town as the sky turned orange. The storage facility was quiet, the air faintly metallic. Inside the unit sat a single wooden pallet holding 2 boxes, one fireproof, one cardboard. I knelt and opened the fireproof box first. Inside were family photographs I had never seen. My parents in Paris, my mother holding a newborn me in front of the old Queen and apartment, my father teaching Thomas to fish on Lake Washington. Beneath them lay a small velvet pouch. Inside was my mother's wedding ring, gleaming in the dim light. I slipped it onto a chain around my neck. The second box was heavier. When I lifted the lid, a stack of documents stared back, stock certificates, property records, and a handwritten letter. The letter began simply. If you're reading this, Harper, then you've already done what I always hoped you would. Stood up for yourself. These papers represent unfinished work, opportunities one never had time to complete. They're yours now. The house is yours. The legacy, too. You have everything you need. Tears blurred the ink as I read. I sat on the cold concrete floor for a long time, letting the words sink into me. When I stepped outside, the city glowed across the water. Ferries drifted under a sky of fading peach and violet. I drove home to Willow Street with the boxes seatbelted beside me, the ring warm against my skin. Back on the porch, the swing creaked gently in the evening air. I looked up at the house, my house, and felt something shift inside me. For the first time, it wasn't about justice or loss or revenge. It was about peace. My phone buzzed then, breaking the calm. The number was unfamiliar, starting with a Boston area code. The message read, "We need to talk about Dad's other file." I froze, the glow of the screen painting my face in blue. For a moment, the world went still. The porch, the maples, even the air itself seemed to wait. I didn't know what other file meant, but I knew one thing for sure. The story wasn't finished. And neither was I.